மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. This is International Master Andrew Martin here, and welcome to this update, the first update on the Alekhine DVD. Since the production of that DVD several years ago, there have been some developments in the main lines of Alekhine's defence, and the first line I'd like to consider is the modern variation, where White contents himself with the simple knight f3. As you'll recall, this has been, over the years, one of the most dangerous ways to meet Alekhine's defence, as White makes no attempt to refute Black's opening. Instead, he steers for what he hopes is a safe plus equals position. In general, White gets best results against the Alekhine, where he plays quietly, and tries to establish a very small advantage out of the opening. What you do find when you play Alekhine's defence for any length of time is that Black gets best results against the really sharp variations, where White just tries to blow Black away in the opening or refute Alekhine's defence outright. Then the resources in Black's position really do come to light. Well, anyway, you'll recall that one of the lines I was recommending on the first edition of this DVD was a simple d takes e5, knight takes e5, and now the flexible c6, a move recommended and played extensively by Tony Miles. I think we can see c6 as a prelude to the move knight d7. Knight d7 is really the move Black wants to play in this situation, exchanging off White's powerful central knight. But of course, if he plays knight d7 straight away, he runs into the sacrifice knight takes f7, when you will need an Olympian memory and a supercomputer at your side to negotiate the complications. C6 is an altogether more simple affair, and has stood Black in good stead over the last few years. In fact, so strong do some of the world's top players think this move is, that in the first game we see Magnus Carlsen employing c6 against Veselin Topalov in their game from Linares in 2008. And if a player like Carlsen is using c6, it speaks volumes for its overall reliability. Well, in this game, let's run through it now. Topalov decided to play bishop d3. Bishop c4 has been played a number of times, but against that, I think Black should stick with knight d7. I've got a couple of examples for you. The first of these is a game Smirin versus Nakamura, which was played in Philadelphia in 2009, and White refused the exchange, preferring to retreat his knight. I suppose White thinks, well, I've got more space, I should keep the pieces on. But this gives Black a very comfortable game after the modern move knight 7 to f6. The point of this is to activate the bishop on c8. Black would really like to be able to play bishop g4 followed by e6 with a very coherent position. So Smirin played h3. Instead, Nakamura put his bishop on f5. This seems to me to be a very solid and stable position for Black. It's reminiscent of a Caro-Kann. It could even be a Scandinavian of some kind. And White really struggles to achieve any sort of advantage at all in this position. Smirin played knight bd2. There was another game where I think it was the German Grandmaster Kinderman who played c4. C4 can't be challenged straight away, but Black plays knight e7, knight c3, h6, bishop c2, and then Black just castles with a very reasonable position. In general, in this type of position, Black is looking to prepare the move c5. That's the freeing advance he would like to get in to expand his position. b3 was played, queen a5, bishop b2, rook fd8, and Black was getting his act together nicely after bishop takes c2, queen takes c2, queen f5, queen takes f5, and then knight takes f5. This was the game Kinderman versus Löffler, which was played in the Bundesliga in 2007. Going back to the game Smirin Nakamura, White played knight bd2, Black castled, knight h4 trying to nab the bishop, and Nakamura calmly played knight e7. Despite the fact that White obtains the bishop pair in this position, Black frees up his game with a thematic c5, and in fact the two players agreed to a draw in this position. There was no need to agree that draw, but Black is fine, as you can see in this position. White can take, Black can recapture. This is a nice free position for Black. So going back to our featured game now, Carlsen played his bishop to d3. It's worth noting at this point that if white goes c4, I don't think that is a very accurate move in this particular situation, and black will respond with knight b4, and that in turn threatens the tactical move queen takes d4 in this position. White has to play bishop e3, but then bishop f5 is a move which gives black very comfortable play. The problem is it's not easy for white to defend the square c2 by natural means, and it's worth noting here that a move like knight d3 is actually met very well by e5. This is a neat tactical point in the position. So going back to the position after bishop f5, let's say white goes knight a3, then we get the simple knight d7. Look out for that idea all the time in the variation with c6, just getting rid of white's central knight and giving black easy equality in this particular position. So maybe that helps to explain why Topalov played bishop d3, black played knight d7 anyway, and Topalov played knight takes d7. Well, it is actually doubtful in my mind whether the move knight takes d7 is the best. Of course, white could and should castle in this position. I think then black will be happy to take off the knight, blocking the e-file, and now knight b4 is an unstereotyped and very effective way to play this position. Carlsen had to face this continuation castles in the game against Sutovsky in 2003. There, white played bishop e4. Black was happy to take the queens off, and then he played an interesting move, pawn up to f5, which is quite an unstereotyped move in this current situation, but it's heavily dependent on the attack on c2. Sutovsky played a3, black dropped his knight back, white retreated the bishop, and now g6 set up an interesting position. Unclear. So let's go back to the game Topalov versus Carlsen. In none of these lines we are seeing black particularly challenged. That's why many Alekhine players are finding this an effective way to play. Knight takes d7, bishop takes d7, castles, and now black could play e6, but that will block in the bishop. He hasn't got any enormously fantastic location for that bishop as yet on d7, so he decides to stick with g6. Knight d2 and now bishop g7 as an effective way to complete his development. White plays knight f3, black castles, white puts his rook on e1, and now the bishop comes out to g4. White went c3, and now a very interesting position here, fighting for the initiative, very interesting continuation. Black played c5. Highly thematic, and well, with black slightly ahead in development, it's also very logical to play this freeing break. Of course, the question is what happens if white takes this pawn. Okay, well, after that, black was intending a splendid combinational idea. Knight takes c3. B takes c3. Bishop takes c3. Which at first sight doesn't look especially dangerous. But at second sight, the white queen is overloaded. She's going to have problems defending all of her army against black's attack. For instance, well, let's say white plays bishop h6 in this position, which looks like a logical move. So if black takes on a1, white recaptures, threatening mate. Instead, black takes on e1 in this position, and that's a rather awkward move to meet. There's no obvious way for white to play this position. If he takes on e1 with the queen, we can go queen takes d3, and if white plays knight e5 in this position, we can defend comfortably with queen to d4. Then if bishop takes f8, we go king takes f8, knight takes g4, queen takes g4, and black is a pawn up. So the complications tend to burn out in black's favour in the line after d takes c5. There's no doubt at all that Topalov was surprised at the board by the move c5. That's the move you should be looking out for in this type of situation. And in the end, he decided to play bishop e4. C takes d4, isolating the queen's pawn, and now e6 leads to a really excellent position for black out of the opening. Black has his pieces in perfect positions to blockade and eventually win that isolated pawn. So white goes queen b3. If he plays h3 in this position, I think black is happy to take this and play queen b6. And white is struggling for a draw, basically, in this position. Black has pressure against d4, which is very difficult to relieve. I mean, if white tries to simplify this position, just taking off on d5, he finds himself with the worst bishop. Bishop e3. Okay, but you know, this is a desperate struggle to get a draw. It's a really unpleasant defence, and especially so against a world-class player. I mean, for instance, if black comes in and whips off this pawn on b2, and white plays a move like queen to d3, black moves away with queen b6, queen c7, and then maybe rook b5, and then rook b1 is white's best way to get the pawn back, and to try to go for the draw. Okay, that was white's best. If we go back to e takes d5, it's absolutely clear that white is the one fighting for a draw. So Topalov would have found that unattractive, hence the move queen b3. But now comes a concrete reply. Bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, bishop takes d4, and now white had nothing better than to exchange on d5. He takes on d5. Black is happy to recapture with the queen. White takes again, plays rook d1, and now bishop g7. Sets up an interesting tactical idea. Now, Topalov played king f1. The problem for him is that if he plays rook takes d5 in this situation, he cedes the d file after rook f d8. And after rook takes d8, we've got two active black pieces against two passive white pieces. And there's no way for white to avoid, again, going material down. For instance, if he goes king f1, we go check, king e2, and then rook h1. I mean, this is simply a bad position for white. So if we go back again, let's have a look at the position after rook takes d8, rook takes d8. Should white try bishop e3 in this position, which looks as though it might bail white out in view of the weakness of black's queenside pawns, then I think just b6 is a good move. And if rook b1, the unfortunate rub for white is that bishop takes b2 wins a pawn anyway. So the position is truly problematic for Topalov. He played king f1, rook f d8, bishop g5, rook d7, rook d2, h6, bishop e3, d4, and after this black is a healthy pawn up. Okay, it's isolated. Black has now obstructed his bishop, but it's a technical exercise now for Carlsen, which he completes with consummate skill. Rook comes to c8 and into c2, so black gets his pieces as active as possible. Rook comes to b1, very passive. Of course, Carlsen knows that Topalov's going to fight tooth and nail to save the point, so it's not that easy to convert these advantages. White goes b3, and black plays rook ec7. I suppose here black could have considered just bringing his king up. That would have been a fairly healthy way to proceed. And if rook c1, which was the move b3, prepared, I think black's more than happy just to take this rook off and play his king to e6. I quite like this method of play by black. But in the game, Carlsen decides to play rook c7. Okay, bishop e1 was played, king f7 anyway. Similar sort of position arises with black still a pawn up. Topalov defends. Black brings his king up confidently into the centre. If we compare the pieces in this position, we will see that black's king is dominating, black's rook is more active. Perhaps white has marginally the better bishop, but it's being blocked by the pawn at d4, which is extra. Very hard to suggest ways for white to play. Of course, if he takes on g6, well, this runs into checkmate. So rook to d3, bishop e5, f3 check, king d5. All these manoeuvres don't really change the overall assessment that White is a pawn down for nothing. He's cramped. He can't do anything. Castle even sacrifices a pawn to get his king in.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. தேங்க்யூ.